The hooting of owl and other forest noises stopped as the two men approached the Split Skull Tavern. Little did they know they should keep going. Two men stood in front of the Forest Tavern. The building was low, long and rambling, and built in a Tudor style. Its small windows were heavily barred and the heavy wooden door shut. Above the door, its sinister sign showed a skull broken in half with an axe in the center. The two men had just met while traveling to Berlin and decided to keep each company on the journey to discourage robbers that frequented the forest. One was tall with sharp features and gaunt look. His dark skin stretched over his protruding bones. The other and younger with a round face and blonde hair and carried a small satchel. Both were dressed in clothes well suited for travel and each carried a sword and pistol to ward off predators, including bandits. Their clothes were covered with dust from the trail. The door swung slowly open and a bearded face with fiery, disheveled red hair peeked around the corner. The owner opened the door and motioned his guests to enter, with a grudging gesture and stern look on his face. Once inside, they noticed a scattering of small wooden tables. A bar sat at the back of the room, a candle gleaming on one and a fire smoldered in the fireplace. Names, the owner grunted. Solomon Kane, said the younger of the two. Jason Oliver, strangers a few in these parts, said their host. Bandits mainly. Sit over at that table and I'll bring some food. Kane and Oliver sat down, tired from their journey. The man brought ale and food to the rough-hewn table and then stood back in the shadows. His features, receding into the darkness, now ominously etched in the firelight as it leaped and flickered. A beard which seemed almost animal-like in thickness covering his face and long unruly hair often covering his eyes. A great nose curved above this beard and two small red eyes stared unblinkingly at his guests. "You name, sir?" asked Kane. "I am the owner of the Split Skull Tavern," replied the man. His tone seemed to challenge his questioner to ask further. "Do you have many guests?" Oliver asked. "Very few," the owner croaked. Kane glanced up into those small red eyes, as if he sought for some hidden meaning in the host's words. The flaming eyes seemed to dilate, then dropped before his cold stare. Finishing their meal, they ordered another tankard of ale. "I'm worn out. Time for bed," said Kane once finished, pushing his empty plate away. "We need to leave early." "You're right," added Oliver, seemingly eager to get to bed. "Can you point us to our rooms?" he said to the owner who was behind a wood bar. Black shadows wavered on the walls as the two followed their silent host down a long, dark hall. The stocky, broad body of the guide seemed to grow and expand in the light of the small candle which he carried, throwing a long, grim shadow behind him. He halted at a small wooden door, indicating that they were to sleep there. When they entered, the host lit a candle with the one he carried, then shambled back the way he had come. In the chamber, the two men glanced at each other. The only furnishings of the room were two bunks, a chair, and another heavy table. A candle lit the room, sitting in its niche in the wall. "Pretty sparse. The owner is a little creepy. Let's see if there's any way to make the door lock," said Kane nervously as he placed his satchel on the lower bunk. "We could break up the table and use its pieces for it to barricade the door," mused Oliver. "Right," Kane replied sarcastically. Kane scowled. "I'm not going to get murdered in my sleep. Let's check the other rooms. Maybe one of them locks." Taking the candle with them, they went into the corridor. Utter silence reigned and the small candle twinkled redly and evilly in the thick darkness. "It seems we're the only guests here," muttered Solomon Kane. "This place is weird with an even odd name. Really, the Split Skull." They tried the rooms next to theirs. None were locked. They came to the last room at the end of the corridor. The door had a heavy latch on the outside. Throwing aside the latch, the door groaned as they opened it. It was furnished like the rest, but had a large stain on the floor. The furniture was in pieces scattered across the room. In their center lay a white skeleton in the center of a pentagram drawn in blood. Oliver set the candle in a niche in the wall. "What the?" said Oliver. "Look at its leg. It's shackled to the floor." The skull is split open. Our host seems to have a terrible secret, said Kane. Yes, said Oliver. Kane went to remove the great iron ring from the skeleton's leg bones. Failing in this, he drew his sword and with them cut the chain which joined the ring on the leg to a ring set deep in the log floor. Why would he shackle a skeleton to the floor? Kane turned toward the outer door, closing the door of the room behind him. I don't think it's always been a skeleton, Oliver replied. Kane drew his sword and began to hack away at the chain, striking a number of times before releasing the skeleton from its bonds. There, now you can be given a proper burial. It was then, with his back to the Oliver, that he felt the touch of cold steel against his neck and knew that a pistol muzzle was pressed close at the base of his brain. Don't move. The voice was low and threatening. Don't move or I'll scatter your brains over the room. Kane stood with his hands in the air. Now turn around. Kane turned and saw Oliver with his sword in one hand and pistol in the other. What are you doing? Said Kane in a shaky voice. You have a considerable sum of cash on you. I want it, but it's for my family. Please, I don't care, give it to me. That was when they heard the rattle of bone on the floor. Looking down, Kane saw them begin to slither across the floor. Oliver never looked down. Kane knew that his end was near and began looking for a way to disarm Oliver and escape. Oliver laughed and motioned Kane toward the door. So, let's get to our room so we can finish this. And don't do anything stupid, I'm a very good shot. Believe me, others have tried. Oliver was in the doorway now, sighting along the barrel. The candle shed a weird and flickering light which did not extend past the doorway. Looking at what would be a painful death, Kane saw, from the darkness behind Oliver, a vague form with a gleaming blade. Oliver went to his knees like a butchered ox, his brain spilling from his split skull. Above him towered the figure of the tavern owner. "Stay there," he roared. The owner thrust sword into his face and drew a long pistol which he held in his left hand. "Get back," he repeated in a tigerish roar, and Kane retreated from the menacing weapon and the insanity in the red eyes. He stood silent, his flesh crawling as he sensed a deeper and more hideous threat than Oliver. There was something inhuman about this man, who now swayed back and forth like some great forest beast while his laughter boomed out again. "Yet another robber," he shouted, kicking the corpse at his feet. "You won't steal from anyone again." He turned to Kane. "Now, hand over your cash. It's in my room. I'll give it to you. Just take it and I'll go." Kane's voice wavered. "No, you must suffer as I did. Look at the marks on my wrists. See the marks on my ankles. And deep in my back, the kiss of the whip. The wounds of the years of the cold, silent cells where I lay as punishment for a crime I never committed. But I escaped and here I make war on all men." Kane heard a rattling ever so faint. What was that? Did Kane see a flash of fear in those hideous eyes? "The sorcerer is rattling his bones," said the host, then laughed wildly. Dying, he swore his very bones would weave a net of death for me. I shackled him to the floor. It appears, he said looking at the pentagram on the floor, he was trying to escape through his magic. Suddenly the insane eyes flared hideously. "Did he say anything to you?" The owner waved his pistol. Kane shuddered in spite of himself. He heard the rattle get louder. When he looked in the flickering candlelight, he saw the bones moving. The tavern owner's laughing stopped abruptly. Looking shocked, he ushered Kane toward him. "I'll chain you up with the sorcerer now. You can live with him. At least, until you join him in death." The tavern owner glanced down at the skeleton in the dim candlelight. "You fool, you've released him from his shackles." That's when the skeleton began to move even more. It collected itself and started to rise. He took the opportunity then to knock the tavern owner into the wall, while he was distracted. He ran to the opening and slammed the door shut. He heard it bang into place. A shot struck the door from the other side, but it was too thick to penetrate. The last thing he heard as he sprinted down the hall was a muffled scream so loud that it shook him to the core. He ran into the forest until he couldn't do so anymore,